Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hello and welcome. I thought today would be a good day to cover something fun. I got a request to go over more generators and deformers. So I thought today would be fun to go over a tool called Spherify. I used this in order to create this animation here just for fun to show examples of what you can do with it. I animated some text. It's very simple and very easy. There's only really a few settings for this tool, so I think it's great to add to your 3D toolbox. So we're going to talk about it a little bit today and how it works. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D. So I just wanted to show how I had created this scene. We're going to be focusing on the Spherify. That's hard to say, by the way. The Spherify Deformer. Since I've been receiving requests to talk about deformers and generators more, people have been seeming to enjoy that. So I'll, of course, finish covering all the mesh tools. I did promise I'd cover all the 3D modeling tools, so we're still doing that. But today, I thought this would be fun. So you can find Spherify right here under your deformers. You can also find it under the Create menu under Deformer here, Spherify. It's under Surface because it affects the surface of models. And just so you're aware of, I have my camera set up here and I used a cloner. We haven't gone over cloners yet, but just so that you're aware, it's a part of the MoGraph system and you can find the cloner and other elements to the MoGraph system under this menu here, labeled MoGraph. And I also, I placed a sphere in there and I'm using the sphere to create these bubbles. So the cloner is creating that, and the random over here, this is an effector, and the effector effects the cloner. It's a very, very fitting name for it. So this is the random effector, and you can of course find this under the MoGraph menu under effector, random. So that's what I added in there to affect the cloner, and I just adjusted the position under the parameter tab and the scale here. So you're aware of that. And we have this handy dandy backdrop in here I added in. You can find the backdrop in here. It's actually a relatively new primitive. There didn't used to be a backdrop not too long ago, but it's nice that they added it in. I was just used to 3D modeling my own for a long time, and now there's a primitive for it, so you no longer need to 3D model one yourself. You can take a shortcut. So there it is. You can use that there for your background if you would like. I added in a really simple redshift area light over here, and I had extruded some text, and we're actually going to go over this setup, and I'm using a box field in order to animate this. So it sweeps by and affects that, and I'm going to go more into depth of this, but I want to give you an overview first because I think that helps you when you're learning. If you kind of get a general idea of what we're doing and why we're doing it before we even start. So I find this tool really fun. I'm opening up a new scene over here, and let's go ahead and create some text again. So I know that there is a text spline here, and there's also the regular text here. I felt like using the text spline, but really you can use either one of these. Maybe this time I'll go with this. I'll use the text. It's It's basically just a text spline extruded, wrapped into one nice handy tool over here. So I'll do the same thing as before, and I'm just going to type in "hey" because it's fun and friendly. And under font, we can choose a font. I use this Montega Gorda. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, but I used this and I found it on Adobe Creative Cloud. So if you have Adobe Creative Cloud, this is included in your subscription. And I'm going to turn on our lines. So right now, there's going to be a problem if we use Spherify on it for a few reasons. We can adjust the depth here. And this is just good to be aware of for learning in general. But I also want to show how this tool works on a cube because I feel like cubes are just great examples. I'm going to increase the segments on here. And we're going to talk about this tool. I'll drop in our Spherify right over here. So this is our very useful deformer, and it does a lot like what you think it does. It spherifys things. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's drop this into the cube. You can see it's a little bit distorted already. So when we click Fit to Parent, you'll notice that this is in a hierarchy. The cube is the parent, the Spherify is the child of the parent, and that's just how they named them. The child can be moved by the parent. The child follows the parent. You can think of it that way. And if you adjust the settings in the parent, it affects the child. But if you adjust the child, it doesn't necessarily move the parent, but the parent moves the child. So that's a simple way to say it. But if you just want to fit the child to the parent, you click this button here, and now you can see that's nice and centered. So there are very few settings for this tool, and we've been covering a lot of really complicated things lately, so I thought this would be a fun break from all the complicated things I've been covering. Of course, those are important too, but just to give your brain a little bit of a break, we're talking about this today. And there are two main settings to it: strength and radius. Strength is how much the deformer is affecting our parent hair, which is the cube. At 100%, this cube is now a sphere. It is spherifying the cube. If we take this down to 0, it is having no effect on this cube. It's doing absolutely nothing. But you can also animate this. So these little diamonds here are keyframes, and we can keyframe this at 0 and then move our timeline over here. And then we can keyframe this at 100. And now we have kind of a boring animation of this cube turning into a sphere. But you can see that strength is adjusting across our timeline, and it's adjusting our cube and turning it into a sphere. You can also adjust the radius of our sphere, of our Spherify, and if we adjust the radius of the Spherify, you can see that our cube kind of follows it. And if we reduce the strength, you can see it's also scaling down to fit that Spherify as we increase the strength. So you have a lot of control here. You can make this bigger so that when it changes to a sphere, it kind of expands out. You have options here. And they're just good to be aware of. And that's basically how that works. At 100%, this is pretty powerful though, and you can see that this is just like wrapping around the sphere as much as it can. If we lessen it, it's not quite as intense of an effect. but it's just fun to play around with. I mean, this is a fun game right here on my screen right now, which is one of the reasons why I love 3D. But let's move on and do some more complicated things with this. Those are your main two options. And here, let's find another Spherify. And I'm going to show you a problem that you might run into if you just start adding this to stuff and you're wondering, why is this looking weird? So I'm going to fit this to the parent once again. And you'll notice that our topology is really weird and it's doing some janky looking stuff here, like this point here. It's not deforming nicely. You can even see that it's struggling keeping the shading nice on this giant n-gon. This is one of the reasons I do not like n-gons. This is an example of it. It doesn't look nice. If you use any deformers on it, if you animate it, if you rig it, you're gonna run into some problems there. So what do we do? What do we do about that? Well, a good place to start is removing those n-gons. I'm going to turn off the Spherify. Let's take a look at our text over here. You'll notice a lot of these settings are very, very similar to the extrude tool and very similar to the spline tool. Because as I've noticed, and I've explained these two tools in the past, as I mentioned, this is basically the same thing as taking a text spline and then dropping it into an extrude. And the settings are about the same, honestly, if you were to combine the settings for these two tools. And we did cover the extrude tool, so if you want to learn all about it, I'll leave it in the description below, along with the tutorials on how to use the spline. But you'll find a lot of the settings here look very, very, very familiar in this. So this is building on your base of knowledge of what we've covered before, but I'll still cover all of this so that you know what's going on if you're new. So settings that are familiar are caps. These are the same settings in the extrude and in most generators in general. Under our caps, we have a start cap and an end cap. Our tessellation is set to n-gons. We do not like n-gons. We are going to change this to have a regular grid. So now we can adjust the size of our grid if we want this to be more detailed and how it deforms. Now we have cleaner topology to work with. We can make this quad dominant if we want to avoid as many triangles as we can. So now this is a lot cleaner geometry to work with here when we use our Spherify. And to give you an idea, here it is. Now, something you might notice is this still isn't deforming perfectly nice. And you'll see that especially if I crank this up to 100%, you may notice some weird things actually happening here. So let's talk about those. So we made those caps nicer, but there's also a problem with the actual edges here. These aren't very detailed, so if we want them to deform nicely, I think it's good to even those out. So we've gone over this setting in the past, so notice that it looks familiar. We've gone over splines, the different types of splines, and we've talked about their intermediate points. So if you've been following along with this podcast, this probably looks really familiar to you. I want you to make those connections. If you're new here, that's okay. Adaptive splines put the most edges or the most points along curves. So you'll notice there's just more edges around this area. and you can adjust the angle here, and it'll put even more edges around those curves. So especially over here, look at this curve, that has a lot. So that's a nice way to save yourself some polygons so that your file is lighter and you have less lag on your computer. But let's say you want to use this for Spherify, or you want to use this for dynamics. If you don't know what dynamics are, that's okay. It's a way to calculate things colliding in 3D and animating them using a simulation of physics. And we aren't getting into that today, but you have intermediate points here. And what's good for situations like that where you have those calculations, or you're deforming something with a deformer like Spherify, you want to set this to uniform. So now we have this set to uniform. You can see that as it's named, it uniformly adds edges along there. So that's nice. That's looking better. We're getting somewhere. But it still isn't a nice even grid like the rest of the letters. So if we want to be really detailed with this, we can increase our subdivisions along our depth right over here with the slider. Now this looks much nicer for deformations. And it's just going to, if we increase the strength here, it's just deforming nicer. So this is kind of fun to mess around with. It kind of looks a little crazy, but it's also like, it's super fun. If you're really into bubble text, the Spherify is a fun tool for bubble text. And you can adjust the strength of it. Maybe I'll reduce that a little bit. And you can actually keyframe this going through here, the Spherify. But you have more options than that, actually. We can just put this in here and find a position that we think this looks really cool. And there's another way you can do this, and I'm going to show you. But we could make this a lot bigger for dramatic effect. Maybe I'll do something like this and do something different. I don't know. I'm trying to decide what I like. Oh, I am tweaking this way too much. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just grab my finished one over here to save you some time watching me just mess around with that and paste it in here. So now we have this and it says, hey. Okay. So another thing that I want to show you is within both the text object and the text spline object, you'll notice that there's a tool in here. And it's the same for both of these. You'll see it under object. Under kerning, it says show 3D GUI. That will give you these where you can move the letters back and forth. And you can make this look nice for those of you really into typography. You have a lot of control over here. So I just want you to be aware of those controls. You can adjust it like this by grabbing this tab. You can adjust it like this by grabbing that tab. You can scale it. But you also have similar options in this. So if I turn these on, you'll see I have all the same controls for right here. And we have Spherify in here. I'm going to delete this field because I want to show you how I set that up. And I just want to make this quad dominant as well. And something else you can do, just so that you're aware of, is under caps, just like the extrude tool, you can add in bevels like this. If I have this set on round, can add in bevels here to make this nice and round, and you can adjust the number of subdivisions for those bevels. If you can see what's happening right here as I adjust that. And I think our spline here, similar to before, I just want to reduce the number on the edge so that it's a little bit of a lighter model and you can see it a little bit better. I need to also delete this from here. There we go. So now we're back to the default settings for the Spherify. And I'm going to show you how to set this up. So within the Spherify, under fields, you'll notice that you can also control the expansion of the Spherify with a field. And you can add in a field over here. You can use a spherical field, you can use a box field. They look a lot like what you'd think they look like. So this one looks like a sphere, and it affects things in a spherical way, like that. It's a field. And when things are within the field, the deformer affects it. When things are out of the field, the deformer has zero effect. And there's a gradient of how much it's affected. The center has 100% of the effect. Out here it has 0. And it's like a spectrum from one to the other. So that's one way you can control it. I'm going to delete this because I want to show you another kind of field. You could also use a box field, and that's what I had used before. And it's very similar to the spherical field, except it's a box shape. And you can scale it up using the T hotkey and dragging your mouse in your viewport. Now it's nice and big. You can also go ahead and see what kind of effect that has. So I'm going to just keyframe the position of this, and you can do that within the coordinates of your field here. You can also just click this button down here, and it'll just set all those keyframes for the position, rotation, and the scale in the X, Y, and Z. So now we have this here, and we could have it move all the way to the end and through the hay right over here, and we can keyframe it again and press play. Now we have this animation. It's still looking kind of boring, and we can make further adjustments to this. One thing we can adjust is the strength here, as we've talked about before. Maybe we don't want hay to become quite so spherical. Maybe this looks better. This still looks boring though. So what's something we can do to make this a little bit more interesting in terms of an animation? Well, if you remember the last version, it had some springiness to it. So let's go ahead back into our fields for our Spherify, and let's look in here. We have some other tools in here. We have the decay, the delay. All of these do different things. I'm going to try decay. And you can affect the decay strength in here, and you can see it kind of slowly fades off the effect. It doesn't go away all at once, and it has more settings than that, which are kind of fun. So I want to show those. If we go ahead and change from our layer tab to our blending, you can see we have other options in here. These are the same settings, by the way, as what's up here, so you can change this to max. These kind of remind me of Photoshop layers in a way, because they build on top of each other like layers. And it's good to just explore in here and see what there is. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the decay here for a moment. We're going to try a different one. We're going to try the delay. And I'll turn this up so they can see it better. It delays the effect a little bit. You can delay it smooth, so it kind of smooths everything out, and now you can see this animation feels a little bit smoother than if I were to just turn this off. This one feels smoother, kind of like smooth jazz. And then you can choose spring instead. And this one's a lot more bouncy, like Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. It's a lot more playful of an animation, but there you go. You pretty much get free animation with these. And then you can choose linear. And linear is a lot like linear keyframes. So you can really see how these affect it, and you can play around with the strength too and get something a little bit unique and different. I like the spring. I think it's fun and playful, and I want this to be fun and playful. So this is one way you can go about it. And now you understand what fields do. And there's a ton of different ones. If you want to be really experimental, you can just explore them. All the fields are in here. There's linear fields, spherical fields, all of these different kinds of fields. And you can play around with the effectors. All the effectors, as I had mentioned, are in here. So have fun with it. Mess around with the settings in here. You can try mixing these together. I can have the delay and the decay affecting this. And it looks totally different now. You can adjust how much one of these is affecting it with these opacity sliders. So that's kind of fun. Maybe I should have animated that original animation like this. I made that sample last night pretty quick, so I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. So I'm sure if you guys really get into these settings and get really experimental, that you can make something even cooler if you put more time into it than I did. It was a very last minute idea to do this today. I actually had another plan of what to cover, but I thought, why not switch it up? So this is mainly what I want to show you here today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And if you have any questions about Spherify, let me know. This was a little bit of a different 3D modeling tutorial, but I think that this still relates to what we've been covering in the past, like topology and why topology matters. It actually affects how deformers work on it, and this is a great example of it. If you have any questions, feel welcome to throw them in the comments. And if you make anything cool, please share it with me on Instagram. I'd love to see it. My handle is Leah Kopke. And you can also share it with me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, probably more than any other social media, which is a little bit crazy to think about. But I hope to see you again next week here on Ambient 3D Animations. We'll go over another 3D modeling tool and all the settings for it. So I hope you'll stick around and see me then, and have a wonderful day. Bye!